Ever wondered about the most haunting chapter in NHL history? The single moment when the romance of gliding blades and the roar of a crowd gave way to a silence so deep it seemed to swallow the entire sport? Welcome to our deep dive into the tragic story of Bill Masterton, the only player ever to lose his life as the direct result of an on-ice injury in an NHL regular season game. Masterton's devastating accident changed hockey forever, turning a routine January evening into a watershed that still reverberates every time a visor is tightened or a concussion spotter lifts a finger. Journey back with us to an era when helmets were optional, machismo reigned supreme, and the sport's breakneck speed masked hidden peril. By the end, you'll understand how one heartbreaking moment forced an entire league to confront its own soul, challenging long-held beliefs about toughness and tradition, and reshaping not only the NHL, but every sheet of ice where the game is played. To appreciate the weight of what happened, you have to picture hockey in the late 1960s as more than black and white photographs or grainy television reels. You need to feel the atmosphere like cold air stinging the back of your throat. Back then, players raced helmetless, hair slicked by sweat and wind, their only protection a sense of invincibility fueled by a culture that equated exposed heads with courage. The so-called gladiatorial code insisted that true grit meant never flinching and certainly never shielding your skull. Helmets existed, but many players dismissed them as cumbersome, vision-blocking contraptions better suited to junior leagues or goalies with fragile egos. Coaches worried, or so the lore went, that a man who strapped on a helmet might play with less edge. General managers considered the optics. How would fans react if their heroes suddenly looked cautious? Against this backdrop stepped forward Bill Masterton, a 29-year-old center for the brand-new Minnesota North Stars. Masterton's journey itself was a study in dogged perseverance. Born in Winnipeg, but schooled in the crucible of American college hockey at the University of Denver, he was neither the flashiest scorer nor the loudest personality. Instead, he blended Midwestern work ethic with a cerebral understanding of the game that coaches loved. He spent time in the Canadian system, but opted for a career in the up-and-coming Western Hockey League rather than languish in Montreal's deep talent pool. By the time NHL expansion cracked the original six monopoly, he seemed almost predestined for the North Stars, a team eager for skill, leadership, and a symbol of professionalism amid the chaos of startup life. Masterton, with his polished degree in engineering and his calm demeanor, fit that role perfectly. For fans in Minnesota, a state where hockey culture is interlaced with winter itself, his signing felt like validation. Their market, their dreams, belonged on the NHL stage. Yet the league he entered was in flux. Expansion meant talent was spread thinner, and rival teams often iced lines of veterans intent on proving they still belonged. The pace was frenetic, forechecking relentless, and defensive systems rudimentary compared with today's choreographed schemes. Players learned survival the hard way. Slashing and hooking were commonplace. Cross-checks landed like thunder from behind. Fights erupted almost as punctuation marks to an already violent ballet. Injuries, especially head injuries, were accepted as occupational hazards, the price you paid to chase a puck across a frozen stage. In this environment, helmets were seen by many as talismans of weakness. A player might wear one after multiple concussions, but only under protest, and often after a late-night carve session by teammates questioning his fortitude. With that in mind, consider the night of January 13th, 1968 at Met Center in Bloomington, Minnesota. The arena hummed with the energy of an expansion club clawing for credibility, its faithful leaning on every shift to measure themselves against an established franchise. The game unfolded with typical 1960s grit, no neutral zone trap, no lightweight composite sticks, just raw speed and Wilson leather gloves creaking under fresh tape. In the first period, Masterton gathered the puck near center ice and carried it across the blue line. What happened next was not, by the standards of the day, an extraordinary play. Two opposition defenders moved to close his lane, one from the left, one from the right. Perhaps his skate blade caught a rut, perhaps their timing converged with cruel precision. Either way, their bodies collided with his, and Masterton pitched backward, weight momentarily suspended before gravity drove him down. Nothing broke his fall, no cage, no visor, no molded plastic shell. His head struck the unforgiving ice with a hollow clap, audible even above thousands of gasps. Trainers rushed, teammates knelt, wide-eyed, the white of their jerseys suddenly matching the pallor on Masterton's face. He never regained consciousness. At the hospital, doctors fought against brain swelling that advanced like a storm they could not outrun. Less than 48 hours later, Bill Masterton was pronounced dead. And in that instant, the unspoken promise of hockey, that the rink is dangerous yet somehow still sacred, was shattered. Newswires lit like fuse cords. Newspapers from Minneapolis to Montreal to Manhattan splashed harrowing headlines. NHL star succumbs to on-ice injury. Columnists cataloged every documented concussion. Parents clipped the articles and pinned them to refrigerators next to team schedules, suddenly aware that their kids' weekend games carried risks far beyond bruised shins. Television anchors, many non-fans at heart, leaned into somber tones, asking why a multi-million-dollar league allowed its athletes to sprint helmetless at 20 miles per hour. To some, Masterton's death crystallized an obvious truth. Whatever romantic notions existed about playing tough, the human skull is fragile, and ice is as hard as stone. To others, it was labeled a freak accident, a once-in-a-century tragedy that should not dictate sweeping change. The debate, inflamed by grief, consumed talk shows, boardrooms, and bar stools. Inside the North Star's locker room, grief had a scent. Cold sweat mingled with the musty odor of drying equipment left untouched for hours. Players sat in uneasy silence, tape still half wrapped around shin guards, faces streaked with tears and unresolved fear. They had grown up idolizing men who risked teeth and collarbones for a slap shot. They had never considered that the game might demand a life. Some raged against the cosmic injustice. Others internalized guilt, replaying the moment like a broken newsreel. Should I have yelled louder, braced him, warned him? The organization faced an almost impossible task. Continue a season while mourning a teammate. Sell the thrill of the new franchise while acknowledging the horror that unfolded in its barn. Coaches found themselves part psychologists, part tacticians, leading practices that felt more like therapy sessions than drills. Beyond the team, the tragedy forced the NHL's governors to stare into a mirror long avoided. The league had grown comfortable marketing its rugged spectacle. Fights were highlighted in promotional reels, and players' scars were badges of honor. But death was different. Death silenced ticket counter banter. Death made corporate sponsors review risk assessments. And in the face of death, the league's leadership could not maintain that helmets were a matter of personal preference alone. Yet progress would not come quickly. Hockey culture, bound by tradition and dominated by men who had earned careers through stoicism, resisted mandates. Many argued that helmets obscured vision, increased heat, or lured checks from opponents who assumed protected players could handle harsher hits. Superstar defenseman Bobby Orr, for instance, famously played entire seasons through a haze of knee pain without a helmet, embodying the era's duality of brilliance and recklessness. In the short term, Masterton's death produced an eerie détente. More players experimented with headgear, but few embraced it permanently. Some coaches encouraged helmet use in practice while allowing freedom during games. Equipment manufacturers raced to refine designs, touting better airflow or expanded sightlines. Yet adoption remained voluntary. The modern mind finds this glacial pace baffling, but to understand it, you must remember how deeply toughness was woven into hockey's identity. A helmet wasn't just an accessory, it was a declaration that you feared what might happen. For generations taught to suppress fear, that was a difficult confession to make. Nevertheless, ripples spread. At youth and collegiate levels, where parental influence outweighed peer pressure, rules shifted swiftly. Many leagues mandated full helmets with attached cages, citing Masterton by name in updated regulations. Insurance carriers, their actuarial tables suddenly stained with new risk, offered lower premiums to schools that enforced strict equipment codes. Pediatricians weighed in, sharing research on skull development and long-term trauma. Within a decade, the image of a helmetless teenager on a local rink seemed reckless, almost antiquated, as if the era into which Masterton skated belonged to a folklore museum, not present reality. Inside the NHL, momentum built slowly but irresistibly. By the late 1970s, as medical literature connecting concussions to chronic impairment became harder to ignore, and as televised replays showcased the bone-rattling collisions of bigger, stronger athletes, league governors finally codified change. Beginning with the 1979-80 season, all incoming players were required to wear helmets. A grandfather clause permitted veterans to remain bareheaded if they had signed professional contracts prior to June 1, 1979. Many clung to that right proud standard-bearers of an old code. Craig McTavish would become the last helmetless player in NHL history, retiring in 1997, a living time capsule who, every shift, conjured the ghost of Bill Masterton and the road that led from tragedy to transformation. Yet, critics maintained the league's evolution was far from complete. Helmets addressed direct skull fractures but did little to mitigate rotational forces that sloshed the brain within its casing. As the 1990s unfolded and scientific understanding of traumatic brain injury deepened, a new frontier emerged: concussions. Former enforcers spoke of migraines, memory loss, and depression. Lawsuits loomed, echoing similar reckonings in the NFL. Masterton's death, once considered an outlier, retroactively looked like an opening chapter in a longer narrative about neurological risk. Did helmets give players a false sense of invulnerability, encouraging harder hits? Did the league drag its feet on penalizing dangerous elbows or blindside checks because padding was presumed sufficient? Even as technology advanced, carbon fiber shells, multi-density foams, energy-dispersing liners, the questions lingered. For Minnesota faithful, the loss took on dimensions both personal and mythic. The North Stars retired Masterton's number 19 in quiet ceremony, the banner's green and gold fabric fluttering over roars of packed houses chasing catharsis. Fans wore black armbands. Local papers covered scholarship drives and youth clinic dedications. Children heard the story at community rinks, sometimes before their first breakaway drill. Skate hard, coaches would say, but remember Bill Masterton. Wear your helmet right. When the franchise relocated to Dallas in the 1990s, some Minnesotans considered the move a secondary heartbreak. Masterton's spirit, they believed, belonged to the state's frozen ponds, not the Texan sun. The birth of the Minnesota Wild in 2000 rekindled that connection. Every winter, as outdoor rinks bloom like ice flowers across the Twin Cities, you can still spot the occasional vintage North Stars sweater bearing Masterton's name, a silent pledge that history is never truly past. Culturally, Masterton's legacy crystallized in 1968 with the creation of the Bill Masterton Memorial Trophy, but the award, given annually to the NHL player who best exemplifies perseverance, sportsmanship, and dedication, is more than hardware. It is the league's conscience. Each nominee carries a personal story of resilience, comebacks from injury, recoveries from illness, heroic community service, and together they weave an ongoing tribute. At every awards ceremony, as cameras pan across luminaries in tailored suits, the reading of Masterton's biography inevitably hushes the room. Modern stars who never played without helmets nod in reverence, reminded that their slick visors and lightweight pads were purchased at the cost of another man's tomorrow. Photographs underscore the contrast. A snapshot from 1968 shows unsmiling faces, shaggy hair, and a sea of unprotected heads. Place it next to a modern bench, bristling with composite sticks, visors catching arena lights like mirrors, and the difference is stark. Yet aesthetics tell only part of the story. The emotional shift, an entire community acknowledging vulnerability without sacrificing intensity, marks the deeper triumph. Today, a player who returns too quickly from a concussion faces as much scrutiny for recklessness as he does praise for bravery. Coaches pull stars from games if symptoms linger. Teams employ neurologists and invest in baseline testing. These safeguards are imperfect and occasionally controversial, but they would have been unimaginable in 1968. Today, when you watch an NHL broadcast honoring the Masterton Trophy nominee from each club, listen closely. Beneath the applause for personal comebacks lies a subdued resonance, a tacit understanding shared by players and fans alike. This award exists because someone paid the ultimate price. It remains a living memorial, one that demands vigilance whenever complacency creeps in, or nostalgia tempts the league to roll back safeguards for the sake of old-time hockey. So, where does that leave us, half a century on? Helmets are standard, visors nearly universal, concussion protocols more stringent than ever. But the conversation continues, stretching from professional dressing rooms to pee-wee rinks, from sports medicine clinics to online debates. Has the NHL done enough? Are fighting majors antiquated theater or an essential pressure valve? Should hitting from behind merit automatic ejections? Each question loops back to that frigid night in Minnesota, when a soft-spoken center laid motionless on the ice and forced a collision between tradition and responsibility. Bill Masterton's story endures because it captures the sport's essence: breathtaking speed shadowed by high stakes, camaraderie tested by hardship, and a perpetual balancing act between human frailty and the pursuit of greatness. His legacy reminds us that every split second on the ice can carry life-altering consequences. It also illustrates how the darkest moments can redefine an institution, nudging it, sometimes reluctantly, toward empathy, science, and accountability.